Ed Sullivan took secrets to his grave in 1974, but what he revealed in his final interviews will destroy everything you thought you knew about television history. For 23 years, The Ed Sullivan Show was the most powerful platform in entertainment. But behind the famous stage, there were vicious fights and racist policies and truths that CBS desperately tried to bury forever. Ed spoke openly near the end, and what he admitted is shocking. The real reason he banned certain performers from ever returning, how the network forced him to censor acts he believed in, the mob connections that controlled who appeared on his show, why he secretly hated most of the celebrities everyone thought he loved, and the one decision he made that he called his greatest shame. This is not another celebration of classic television. These are confessions from Ed Sullivan himself, exposing the ugly machinery behind America's favorite variety show. If you grew up watching Elvis or the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, you are about to learn the disturbing truth about what it really took to get on that stage. Before we dive into video, please subscribe to our channel. Ed Sullivan never wanted to be on television. He was a newspaper columnist who wrote about Broadway and nightlife in New York City. He had no performing experience and no desire to be in front of cameras. But in 1948, CBS was desperately looking for programming to fill their new television schedule. They approached Ed because he had connections to every major entertainer in the country. CBS thought Ed could book talent that nobody else could reach. Ed agreed to host one show as a favor. That one show turned into 23 years and over 1,000 episodes. But Ed revealed in his final interviews that he regretted saying yes almost immediately. The first episode was a disaster. Ed was stiff and awkward on camera. He had no charisma and no stage presence. Critics destroyed him. One reviewer said Ed Sullivan had all the personality of a corpse. Another said watching Ed was like watching your uncle try to be entertaining at a funeral. Ed was humiliated. He wanted to quit, but CBS begged him to continue. They promised him things would get better and that audiences would warm up to him. Ed reluctantly agreed, but he admitted he spent the next 23 years feeling like a fraud. What fans never figured out is that Ed Sullivan hated being on camera. He was painfully shy and self-conscious. Before every show, Ed would vomit from nervousness. His hands would shake so badly that he had to clasp them together to hide the trembling. Ed revealed that he developed an ulcer from the stress and had to take medication just to get through tapings. But he could not quit. The show became massively successful and CBS was making millions of dollars. Ed was contractually locked in and financially dependent on the income. He was trapped in a job that made him miserable. Ed said the only thing that kept him going was his love of discovering new talent. He genuinely enjoyed finding unknown performers and giving them a national platform. But that joy was constantly overshadowed by his hatred of being the face of the show. One of the most disturbing secrets Ed Sullivan revealed was how CBS controlled every aspect of the show through censorship and racial discrimination. Ed said the network had a long list of topics and performers that were banned. Anything controversial or political was immediately rejected. Ed wanted to use his platform to address important social issues, but CBS refused. They told him audiences wanted escapism, not reality. Ed also revealed that CBS had unofficial quotas for how many black performers could appear on the show. The network feared that Southern affiliates would drop the show if there were too many African American acts. Ed fought against this policy constantly. He believed talented performers deserved opportunities regardless of their race. But CBS threatened to cancel the show if Ed did not comply. Ed admitted he caved to the pressure, and that decision haunted him for the rest of his life. There was one incident that Ed called his greatest shame. In 1956, Ed booked Nat King Cole for the show. Nat was one of the biggest stars in the country, and Ed admired him greatly. But Southern CBS affiliates threatened to boycott the episode. The network told Ed he had to cut Nat's performance time and make sure he did not interact too much with white performers on stage. Ed followed those instructions, and Nat King Cole was given less than 3 minutes of airtime. After the show, Nat confronted Ed and asked why he had been treated differently than white performers. Ed could not look him in the eye. He made excuses about timing and the show running long. Nat knew Ed was lying. Ed revealed that conversation destroyed him. He had betrayed a man he respected because he was too weak to stand up to the network. Ed said if he could change one thing about his career, it would be that moment. He should have put Nat King Cole on for as long as he wanted and told CBS to deal with it. But Ed chose his job security over doing what was right. Ed Sullivan also revealed the truth about his relationship with Elvis Presley. The public believed Ed discovered Elvis and gave him his big break. But Ed admitted he did not want Elvis on the show at all. Ed thought rock and roll was garbage and that Elvis was a talentless pretty boy who appealed to screaming teenage girls. CBS forced Ed to book Elvis because other shows were getting huge ratings from rock and roll acts. Ed resented being told what to do, and he took that resentment out on Elvis. Before Elvis' first appearance in 1956, Ed gave him a list of rules. Elvis could not move his hips. He had to tone down his performance. He had to wear a conservative suit. Elvis agreed to everything because he needed the exposure, but Ed revealed that he made those demands not because of network standards, but because he wanted to humiliate Elvis. He wanted to prove that Elvis was nothing without his gimmicks. What happened next shocked Ed. Elvis went on stage, and even with all the restrictions, he was electric. The audience went insane. Ed had never seen a reaction like that in his life. After the show, Ed had to admit he had been wrong. Elvis was genuinely talented and charismatic. Ed apologized to Elvis backstage, and they developed a respectful relationship. But Ed admitted he was always jealous of Elvis. Ed had worked for decades to become famous, and he still had no real stage presence. Elvis walked out and owned the room instantly. Ed said that jealousy made him cruel to other young performers who had natural talent. He would book them and then undermine them with bad time slots or unflattering introductions. Ed revealed he sabotaged dozens of careers because he could not handle being outshined on his own show. The Beatles' appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show in 1964 is one of the most famous moments in television history. But Ed Sullivan revealed the truth about that booking, and it is far different from the legend. Ed did not discover the Beatles. His talent coordinator saw the group in England and told Ed they were going to be huge. Ed dismissed the idea. He thought the Beatles looked ridiculous with their long hair and their matching suits. He said no British rock band was going to succeed in America. But the talent coordinator kept pushing, and eventually Ed agreed to watch footage of the Beatles performing. Ed was shocked by the crowd reaction. Thousands of screaming fans completely out of control. Ed realized the Beatles were not just a band. They were a phenomenon. So Ed booked them, but he negotiated the lowest fee possible. He paid the Beatles only $10,000 for 3 appearances. At the time, that seemed like good money, but the Beatles were already massive stars in England. Ed took advantage of their desperation to break into the American market. What Ed never admitted publicly until his final interviews was that he tried to control the Beatles the same way he had controlled Elvis. Ed gave them rules about what they could, where and what songs they could perform, but the Beatles refused. They told Ed they would do the show their way or not at all. Ed was furious. Nobody had ever defied him like that. He threatened to cancel their appearance, but his producers begged him not to. They knew the Beatles were going to be the biggest thing the show had ever seen. Ed backed down, but he resented the Beatles for the rest of his life. He admitted he was jealous of their youth and their confidence and their ability to change culture. Ed had spent 23 years trying to shape American entertainment, and 4 guys from England did it in one night. Ed Sullivan also revealed his complicated relationship with the mob. In the 1950s and 60s, organized crime controlled much of the entertainment industry in New York. Club owners and booking agents were often connected to the mafia. Ed admitted he had to work with these people to get access to certain performers. There were times when mob figures would call Ed and tell him he needed to book a specific act. Ed knew if he refused, there would be consequences. Ed revealed one terrifying incident from 1959. A mobster came to Ed's office and told him he needed to feature a particular singer on the show. Ed said the singer had no talent and he would not do it. The mobster leaned across Ed's desk and said, "This is not a request." Ed felt genuine fear for his life. He put the singer on the show and gave him prime placement. The singer was terrible and the reviews were brutal, but Ed had no choice. What made it worse was that CBS knew about the mob influence and did nothing. Ed said network executives told him to handle it quietly and not make waves. They cared more about keeping the show running smoothly than protecting their host. Ed admitted he felt abandoned and alone. He was dealing with dangerous criminals and his own employer would not back him up. Ed also revealed that some performers used mob connections to get on the show. They would bypass Ed entirely and go through organized crime figures who would pressure Ed to book them. Ed said it made him sick because truly talented performers were being pushed aside for people with the right connections. But there was nothing Ed could do. He was caught between the network and the mob, and both had more power than he did. One of the most painful revelations Ed Sullivan made was about his family life and how the show destroyed it. Ed was married to Sylvia Weinstein for over 40 years, but he admitted their marriage was mostly unhappy. Ed worked constantly. He spent every waking hour thinking about the show and booking talent and dealing with network pressure. Sylvia felt neglected and resentful. Ed said they fought constantly about his priorities. Sylvia accused him of loving the show more than his family. Ed admitted she was right. He had become obsessed with maintaining his success and everything else, including his wife and daughter, suffered. Ed revealed that his daughter Betty grew up barely knowing him. Ed missed birthday parties and school events and family dinners because he was always working. Betty begged him to spend more time with her, but Ed would promise and then break that promise over and over. Ed said his daughter eventually stopped asking. She accepted that the show was more important to him than she was. When Betty got older, she told Ed that growing up as his daughter had been lonely and painful. Ed said, hearing that broke his heart, but it was too late to fix. The damage had been done. Ed also revealed that his wife Sylvia became depressed and started drinking heavily. She felt trapped in a marriage with a man who was never emotionally present. Ed said he knew Sylvia was suffering, but he did not know how to help her. He was so consumed by work that he had no emotional energy left for his family. Ed admitted he failed as a husband and a father. He sacrificed the people who loved him for a television show that did not love him back. Ed Sullivan also revealed the financial reality of his situation, and it shocked people. Everyone assumed Ed was incredibly wealthy because his show was so successful. But Ed said CBS paid him far less than people thought. The network owned the show and kept most of the profits. Ed was essentially a highly paid employee, but he did not have ownership stake. Ed tried to renegotiate his contract several times, but CBS refused. They knew Ed had no leverage. If he quit, the show would go on with a new host. Ed revealed that he lived comfortably, but he was not rich. When he looked at how much money CBS made off his work for 23 years, Ed felt cheated. He had given them decades of his life and made them hundreds of millions of dollars. In return, he got a decent salary and a destroyed family life. What made Ed even angrier was watching other television hosts negotiate better deals. Ed said he paved the way for variety shows, but younger hosts were getting ownership and profit sharing that Ed never received. Ed admitted he was bitter about that. He felt like he had been used and discarded. Near the end of his life, Ed tried to buy the rights to episodes of his show so he could control the reruns and make additional money. CBS refused to sell. Ed said that final rejection proved that the network had never valued him as a partner. He was just a tool they used to make money. One of the most surprising things Ed Sullivan revealed was his opinion of the celebrities he interviewed. The public assumed Ed loved all the famous people who appeared on his show, but Ed admitted he found most of them shallow and narcissistic. Ed said actors and singers were often rude and demanding backstage. They would throw tantrums about their dressing rooms or their placement in the show. Ed had to smile and accommodate them, but inside he despised their entitled behavior. Ed revealed there were certain celebrities he banned from ever returning. He would not name all of them, but he hinted that some of the biggest stars of the era were terrible human beings behind closed doors. Ed said one famous comedian was so cruel to his staff that Ed told him never to come back. The comedian tried to use his connections to force his way back on the show, but Ed stood firm. That was one of the few times Ed felt like he had real power. Ed also revealed that many of the interactions on his show were completely fake. When Ed would chat with celebrities after their performances, those conversations were scripted in advance. The celebrities would tell rehearsed stories that made them seem charming and spontaneous, but Ed knew it was all an act. He said some of the most beloved moments on his show were carefully manufactured to create an illusion of authenticity. Ed admitted he was complicit in that deception. He would pretend to be surprised or delighted by things he had already heard in rehearsal. Ed said he felt like a fraud every single week. He was lying to the audience and lying to himself about what the show really was. Ed Sullivan also revealed the toll the show took on his health. Beyond the ulcer and the constant anxiety, Ed developed high blood pressure and heart problems. His doctors told him he needed to reduce his stress or he would die young, but Ed could not stop. He was addicted to the work and terrified of what would happen if he walked away. Ed said he felt like the show was the only thing that gave his life meaning. Without it, he would just be a failed newspaper columnist who got lucky. That fear kept him going even as his body broke down. Ed also admitted he relied on alcohol and prescription medication to cope. He would drink before shows to calm his nerves. He would take pills to help him sleep. Ed said he knew he was self-medicating, but he did not know what else to do. The pressure was relentless, and he had no healthy way to deal with it. In 1971, CBS cancelled The Ed Sullivan Show after 23 years. The network told Ed that variety shows were no longer popular, and they needed to make room for younger, hipper programming. Ed was devastated. He had given CBS over 2 decades, and they discarded him without hesitation. Ed revealed that he begged the network to give him one more season. He promised he would update the format and book more contemporary acts. CBS said no. The decision was final. Ed said being cancelled felt like being told his life's work was worthless. He fell into a deep depression He had defined himself by the show for so long that he did not know who he was without it. Ed tried to stay busy by doing guest appearances and special projects, but nothing filled the void. He felt lost and purposeless. Ed Sullivan's final years were filled with regret and reflection. He looked back on his career and saw all the compromises and all the pain and all the sacrifices. Ed admitted he wished he had been braver. He wished he had stood up to CBS when they enforced racist policies. He wished he had fought harder for performers he believed in. He wished he had put his family first instead of chasing success that ultimately meant nothing. Ed said if he could do it all over again, he would have quit after the first year. He would have stayed a newspaper columnist and lived a quiet, anonymous life. But he got seduced by fame and power, and by the time he realized what he had lost, it was too late. What Ed wanted people to understand is that the Ed Sullivan Show was not the wholesome family entertainment it appeared to be. Behind the smiling host and the talented performers was a machine built on exploitation and compromise. Ed said he was complicit in that machine, and he would carry that guilt to his grave. Ed Sullivan died in 1974, just 3 years after his show was cancelled. He was 73 years old, but people who knew him said he looked much older. The years of stress and regret had aged him beyond his years. Ed's final interviews revealed a broken man who had achieved everything and lost what mattered most. His legacy is complicated. The Ed Sullivan Show introduced America to some of the greatest talents in history, but it also represented everything wrong with the entertainment industry: control and censorship, and the sacrifice of human dignity for profit and ratings. What fans never figured out is that Ed Sullivan was not the warm, avuncular host they saw on television. He was a deeply insecure man who felt like an imposter his entire career. He was controlled by networks and mobsters and his own fear of failure. He destroyed his family and his health chasing a success that never made him happy. That is the real story of the Ed Sullivan Show. Behind the iconic moments and the historic performances was a man who gave everything and ended up with nothing. Ed Sullivan's tragedy is a warning about the cost of fame and the price of compromising your values. He spent 23 years on the most famous stage in America, but he died alone and full of regret. That is the truth Ed Sullivan finally revealed and the hidden cost of creating television history.